Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm following up on a request I had to show how I recreate dials. And this is something that I have to do every now and then, and it's a skill that I have from a previous life. And there's two predominant software packages I use when I'm doing this kind of work. The first is GIMP, which is a free and open source graphic manipulation program. And that's the one that you can see here. With an image of a Gulbranson dial that I've worked on some time ago. This is how the dial came to me. It's not how it started life, but that's the state that it was in when I got it. So, you know, you've got a couple of options here. You can try and find a second-hand dial. You can go, well, that's it for the set and ditch it, or you can recreate something. And for me, I like to have a crack at recreating it. So what I did initially is try to lay this out on the scanner bed, and you can see here most of it was actually still there. A lot of these smaller pieces were missing, but there is enough here for me to actually work with and start to recreate what's going on. So from here I was able to scan this, as you can see, and once I had it scanned I can actually move it to the second program. But just to show you why I use two different programs, GIMP is a graphics program that works with images, and it works with raster images, and raster images are images that are made up from pixels. So if we zoom right into any point on this image, you can see that what we effectively have is a pile of dots, and each one's a different color. And that is how the image is made up. And that's how photographs are made up, the JPEGs you take with your cell phone. Normal images are made up that way. And you know, the size of these pixels depends on the resolution. So higher resolution, you get more pixels packed into a space, you get more detail. But it's not really suitable for recreating a dial. It probably would be if I was creatively artistic and able to actually redraw stuff, but you know, I couldn't get a job at Pack and Save doing their advertising. So for me, I have to work with what I've got and recreate it. So once I had that, I was able to recreate a new dial, and in fact here's the dial sort of being test fit into the cabinet, and you can kind of see I started to color it. And then there's an example of it side by side with an original dial photo that I had, and this one. Now this isn't perfect, and if I did it again, you can kind of see that these lines appear a little bit thinner than the lines that I've created. I try and get things as good as I can, but actually I'm not overly happy with how this came out. And I would probably do it again if I was going to carry on with this particular dial. But somebody actually bought this set off me and was quite happy to take the dial as it was and just mess around with it themselves. So that set's now gone, and I have no need to continue the development of this at this stage. But I just wanted to show you that that's what you can do. So for this demonstration, I'm going to recreate the dial from a Columbus Model 6, and I'm going to do that because there's two different dials on the Model 6 that I've seen anyway. The first one is a hand-painted dial, and the early sets were hand-painted. It's almost hard to believe, but if you look up close you can actually see it. The factory was having trouble getting skilled staff who were able to etch glass accurately and then screen print them, so they found a lady who was exceptional. It blows my mind that this dial was actually made by hand, but that's what they did to keep production up and keep sets traveling out to the radio centers for sale. So there is this hand-painted dial, and then my Model 6 has the proper etched dial, and that is a later dial. So I think it was about 1948 there was a big reshuffle of stations in New Zealand. A lot of frequencies moved around a little bit, and so dials had to be either replaced or updated. And Columbus Radio Centres, or Radio Corp, actually said, well, if you bought a set within, I think it was the last 6 months, then we'll replace your dial for free. Otherwise there'll be a nominal charge to get a new dial. So this was obviously the new dial for the Model 6 that came about because of that. It is starting to lose its ink. It's a little bit hard to see here, but there's some damage here, and some damage to one of the ships here. Now I know that's hard to see, and it'll be a wee bit clearer in a moment. So this particular job I'm going to do here is partly for preservation and partly to show you how I go about this process in case you want to have a crack yourself. Now of course this is the easy bit. Once you've actually done the artwork, you then have to actually create the dial, and we'll get to that as well. So this is my first scan of this dial, and because scanner beds have a white background, I knew that I couldn't use the actual scanner just with throw the dial on the glass and scan it. So I tried putting a book over it. Now this is obviously not dark enough, so I went with a slightly darker book that some of you may recognize. And so this is looking better. And if I zoom in on this, now I don't intend this to be a tutorial on how to use GIMP, because that would be a large series of videos and go into depth well beyond where you probably need to. If you're really interested in this, there's a ton of information out there, but I'll show you the basic tools that I use for this kind of work. Now, the first and most important thing is that if you hold down the control button on the keyboard and then roll your mouse wheel, assuming you have a mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. That is really important for being able to use this program fast and effectively. So I can zoom in on any particular part of the image that I need to quite quickly, and it'll basically zoom to wherever you put the mouse. So if I put the mouse on the R, that's where it's going to zoom in. If I want that R to move over to the center a bit, then I need to move over here. Right, so you basically, the zoom works wherever the mouse is. So that's a really useful thing to know, and it's a really useful sort of efficiency tool. So first things first, it's a little bit blurry, and it's a little bit blurry because I made a mistake here and I actually put the dial on the glass the wrong way up. So scanners work by focusing at the very face of the glass that things sit on. So their focal point is set to right on that top edge of the glass. And what I've got here is the glass dial, but the ink is on the far side of it. So it's actually focused bang on this front face of the glass, but the ink's on the other side. So I realized that once I'd actually scanned it in a way that I could see it. And so I flipped it over and rescanned it again, and now you can see it's much sharper, and there's much more detail on the likes of the ship here. If you look at how it was before, quite blurry, much sharper and more detailed, and I can work with that. So this is the one that I'm going to start working with. You can see the damage that's starting to occur with the paint on the glass here, which is what I'm trying to preserve by doing this. I don't actually need this dial particularly, but I wanted one that was going to be easy to work on and be able to show you what I'm going to do and the tools that you really need. So the package that we're going to put this into, it will really help to have this as a guide, and one of the things that we want to do is actually get it lined up nice and square. Now to do that, there is a rotate tool. The tools in the latest version of GIMP are all stacked, and most of the transformational tools are on this stack here that out of the box looks like this weird T. If you just click on it and hold it, then you can get the ones we need. Now we want rotate, and you could just eyeball it. You click somewhere on the image, and if we zoom out, you're going to see that there's a dot which by default puts itself in the center of the image. Now we don't actually want all of this, and we don't need all of it. So first thing I'm going to do is actually use the select tool, and I'm just going to grab the bit of the image that contains the dial glass and go image, crop to selection. That gets rid of a whole bunch of stuff we don't need, and it's going to make things just a little bit easier. It's also going to be easier on your computer because when you're rotating large images, you're dealing with lots and lots of data, and that can be quite CPU intensive. Now, my PC is reasonably modern and quick, and it will handle it, but if your PC is a bit older, the more you're working with, the slower things will go. And you'll actually see there's a progress bar down here when it's doing slow operations that will just chug away really, really slow, and sometimes it'll actually chug away to the point where it actually freezes. And generally speaking, you don't need to worry about that. Just be patient, because that progress bar will be still working in the background. It's just frozen on screen. So let's rotate this, and you can see I can kind of eyeball it, but I can't actually say whether that's really flat or not. So one thing you can do is you can pull rulers onto the image from both the front and the side, and that can be quite handy for lining up where you want to do crops from. So if I was to actually crop from here, it will snap. You've seen that snap to the corner of those two guidelines, so that can be quite handy. But let me just go back here. Now, to go back, I'm using Control Z. You can go edit and undo, but you can see that there's a Control Z is the shortcut and Control Y is the redo. So Control Z undoes each operation you've done in order. Control Y puts them back again if you've screwed up and you've gone back too far. So again, sort of efficiency tools that make this quicker and easier to use. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to pop a line down here, and I'm just going to pop this at the bottom of the 0 and the 800, which is near enough to where I think the center of this class is. It doesn't actually matter where you put it. What you're trying to be is consistent. I'm going to move that, so I'm going to go up and grab the move tool, and I'm just going to move it to the bottom of that 0. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to get this as flat as possible so that the image I create, or the mask I create for the new dial, is nice and square as well. So now we grab the rotate tool, click here. I'm going to move this. If you hover over it, it'll change color, and you can then drag it. I'm going to move that to the point that I lined up this guideline on, and that's the center of rotation. So now if I rotate this image, it rotates around that. So you can click and drag this and sort of freeball it a little bit. Zoom in, that looks reasonable there. Zoom into the other end, and again I'm simply using that control and then roll the mouse wheel. If you don't have a wheel on your mouse, then obviously you can't do this, but most mice these days do. If you're using a laptop, you should be able to pinch zoom on a modern laptop. Use 2 fingers on the trackpad and then just spread them apart or pull them together. I believe that should work in Windows anyway, but you'll have to experiment with your own setup to see how you can best do this if you don't have it. You do have zoom controls down here, so you can kind of manually do it. You know, pick a zoom level or double click it and say I wanted 73%. Type it in and hit enter. So that's pretty much got us to the point where the image is now square. You might notice this line doesn't necessarily look 100% parallel with the images. So here you need to make a decision. Do I care about the numbers or do I care about this line? And in fact, the line I can deal with later, but the numbers I all want to be nice and square. So I can straighten this up in the other program, but having a nice neat straight line of numbers is much more useful to me. So I'm just going to leave that at that. And now that I've got it set where I want, you have to click this rotate button to freeze it. and it's now rotated. You'll see this line or this box of what we call marching ants, and that means that the rotation we just made is done, but it's not fixed. And you can see this floating selection here, which we can fix a couple of ways. You can either right click on the floating selection and anchor the layer, which will do it, or if you're in the select tool here, you can see that there's an anchor beside the cursor, and if I just click away from the image somewhere in this grey area, it's now affixed that. We've only got one layer here, and now we can actually drag a box a little bit closer around the dial and crop it. So just again, we're using the selection tool, and I'm just going to select a new area. You can tweak this if you like. We don't have to be too perfect here. You can, if you want to, get it right on the edge of the glass, but this glass was not actually cut square. So you can see the original glass is not particularly square. That won't particularly matter. There's a little bit of room to move this particular dial inside the clamps that hold it in place. But if you then go image, crop to selection, and there we have the dial. So next step is to save that. So we go File, and we need to go Export As. If you try Save As, which you're probably used to doing in just about every other program with a file save dialog, you'll discover that GIMP in their ultimate, don't get me started, it's actually something that really annoys me, but it's one of the few things in GIMP that annoys me. They made an arbitrary decision to make save only save in their proprietary file format. So if you try and go save, you're going to see this XCF file format, and if you try to save it with anything else, it just won't work. So they have a proprietary file format, which is the only thing you can use save for. Now that file format is handy because it saves all of your history, your undo history, layers, everything is saved with the image, so you can keep working on it at a later date. If you're doing something complex, that can be quite handy. But if you just want it as a JPEG or a JPG, which is the file format of most images that you're probably going to deal with, then you're going to want Export or Export As. Now this has already got a file name because I've saved this previously when I was messing around with it, but just to show you, when you're saving a JPG, we go Export As, and I'm just going to change the file name so that we can go through this process. In this case, I'm saving it in my pictures folder, in a folder called Model 6 with this file name. Click Export, and the second dialog will pop up, and this one is your JPEG options. Now JPEGs can be saved with a certain amount of compression, and the trade-off is file size. So if you tick this to show the preview in the window, it's going to show you what you'll get for the quality level that you select. If we slam this to 0, you're going to see the quality is just not there at all. At 100 it's full, and as you go down you can start to see what's happening, and here you can see that the file size actually changes as we do that. So if you're saving something for use on the internet, around about 70% is a pretty good trade-off, right? 89K as opposed to 495K, and the image quality is not that hard, not that easy to detect the difference unless you really start to zoom in. So in this case we don't care. I'm going to go for 100% quality because I'm not putting it on the internet. Well, I am because you're watching it, but not as an image. So I'm going to save that at 100%. I don't need any of this, don't need any of these to be saved. EXIF data is the data that gets saved with digital images. So if you are taking photos on, say, your phone, then the EXIF data will contain things like the focal settings, the white balance, the camera version, the phone version, the zoom level, the potentially GPS data if you've got location turned on. So all of that gets saved in this EXIF data part of the image. Now again, I don't care about this, but if you do care about that, then you probably want to leave that ticked. But for the purpose of this particular exercise, there isn't any EXIF data we care about. So at that, I'm just going to click export, and it's done. It's now saved and it's in that file location, model 6, and there's the 3 that I've been messing around with, and this is the one that we just saved. So that's ready to go, and at this point we can put that into the next package.